Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a story that it really cuts to the very core of human vulnerability, trust, and, well, the profound, almost unimaginable depths of betrayal. Just picture this. A silence so absolute, so unnatural, it almost screams louder than any sound. For 10 agonizing days, a 3-year-old child, Jailyn, was left utterly and completely alone. Her entire world, once vibrant, shrinking to the stifling confines of just a single playpen as she suffered a slow, agonizing descent into darkness. It's a premise that doesn't just chill you, it sort of freezes you to your very bones, a cry for help that went tragically, unforgivably unanswered. Okay, let's try and unpack this deep dive. It's more than just a true crime narrative, though it undeniably carries all the weight and horror of one. It's an exploration into the dark corners of human depravity, yes, but also a raw examination of collective grief, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the deep societal scars left behind by an act like this. We're going to take you inside the investigation right from the very moment first responders breached the door of that silent apartment. We'll go through the shocking, almost unbelievable details of Cristel Candelario's actions, all the way to the impassioned legal battle that just gripped a nation, and finally, to a judge's thunderous, searing verdict that sought to give voice, at long last, to a silenced child.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating and tragically resonant here is that our journey today isn't solely about understanding what happened in those 10 horrifying days, but maybe why this particular case reverberated so profoundly, why it gripped the collective consciousness across the entire nation with such ferocity. It really forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths, doesn't it? About the sacred bond of trust, the fundamental responsibilities we assume as parents and as a community, and the broader devastating implications of such an ultimate betrayal. We'll be sort of connecting the dots between one individual's horrifying actions and the overwhelming visceral societal response they provoked. Our comprehensive source for this devastating narrative is the account titled The Loneliest Cry, The State versus Cristel Candelario and the 10 Days of Baby Jailyn. Our mission, as always, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from this heartbreaking story, helping you understand its full scope, its indelible impact, and, the lingering questions it raises.
So let's begin our journey back to that sweltering June afternoon in Cleveland. The initial call that buzzed across Officer Mike Easton's radio was, well, it was about as mundane as they come for a seasoned police officer, just a standard wellness check. A frantic mother, Cristel Candelario, she claimed she had just returned home from vacation and found her 3-year-old daughter unresponsive. Easton, a 15-year veteran, his gaze, accustomed to countless domestic disputes, petty crimes, tragic but explainable emergencies, he responded with that practiced, almost automatic efficiency. He assumed it would be another sad, maybe, but comprehensible medical emergency. But Easton later recalled that feeling, that sense of routine, realizing it was the last time he would feel anything normal that day. The apartment building itself, entirely nondescript. A plain, weathered brick structure, its interior hallways carrying that lingering, heavy scent of stale cooking oil and disinfectant, a common enough smell in older apartment complexes. When they arrived, Cristel Candelario, the mother, met them in the hallway. She immediately launched into this wailing, almost theatrical display of grief that just struck Officer Easton as deeply instinctively wrong. He noticed a crucial detail that snagged at his experienced eye. Despite her supposed trauma, her hair and makeup were immaculate, her vacation tent still fresh and vibrant, a stark, unsettling contrast to the distress she was outwardly portraying. Her words were frantic, almost rehearsed scream, each syllable laced with a kind of performative hysteria. "She's not breathing. I just got back from vacation and she won't wake up."
Right. And once inside the apartment, the most immediate and profound impact, as Officer Eastman described it, wasn't a particular sound, but a chilling, absolute absence of sound. It wasn't peaceful silence, it was a heavy, suffocating blanket. An absolute void where a 3-year-old's laughter or even fussing should have been. It was the sound of a vacuum, of life, just abruptly extinguished. The air itself was palpable, oppressive, hot, stagnant, thick with a sour, putrid smell of decay and ammonia that clung to the back of the throat, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just a bad odor. It was a visceral, unmistakable stench of profound neglect and something far more sinister. Easton's instincts, honed by years on the street, they pulled him past the living room, where an open suitcase lay on the floor, spilling out brightly colored beach towels and clothes.
It was a jarring image.
Exactly. Almost mocking. He moved methodically toward the back bedroom, the source of that unbearable smell getting stronger with every step, drawing him, inexorably towards the truth. What's fascinating here is how much our senses, beyond just sight, contribute to that initial assessment for experienced officers. For seasoned pros like Easton, The absence of expected sounds, combined with a visceral, penetrating smell of decay, it creates an immediate primal alert. It's like a nonverbal confirmation of horror that bypasses conventional visual cues, almost a direct sensory warning sign that something's profoundly wrong, even before you see it.
And what the investigators found next, well, truly defies belief. It devastated the hardened officers who encountered it. The room was unmistakably a child's sanctuary, decorated with faded unicorn decals, a small, dusty bookshelf, poignant details that spoke of a life that once held innocence, hope, maybe vibrant imagination. But in the desolate center of that room stood a playpen. And inside that playpen, on a soiled-stained mattress, lay a tiny, terrifyingly still form, baby Jailyn. Officer Easton, a man who had confronted death in all its brutal, ugly forms, gunshot wounds, horrific car wrecks. He was utterly unprepared for this. This wasn't sudden violence. This was the brutal, protracted consequence of absence, of prolonged, unimaginable neglect. The child was shockingly emaciated, her skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Her lips were cracked and blue, parched from days without water, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, staring blankly into nothingness. She lay in a mess of her own waste, the playpen itself transformed into a wretched, inescapable cage of unimaginable horror. But the detail that broke him, that burned itself into his memory, was the indentation in the crib mattress, a small, perfect outline of a child, worn into the fabric from days of restless, hopeless movement, a haunting echo of a tiny life struggling agonizingly for survival, and on the floor just outside the playpen, an empty baby bottle, a cruel, mocking symbol of the thirst that was never quenched.
In that gut-wrenching moment, Officer Easton's voice, described as a choked whisper, cut through the heavy silence as he issued the grim command. Call it in. Tell them to send everyone, the homicide unit, the medical examiner. This isn't a wellness check. This is a tomb. That statement solidified his immediate horrifying realization. He looked at Crystal Candelario, her face still contorted in that mask of performative grief, and a cold, hard certainty began to form in his gut. He knew instinctively this wasn't a case of a distraught mother finding her child. This was a case of a killer returning, with chilling indifference to the scene of her own crime. The vacation wasn't an alibi designed to obscure her actions. It was, chillingly, the very instrument of the murder. It became clear the act of abandoning her child for a pleasure trip was the weapon itself. This highlights a crucial insight. Trained professionals like Officer Easton often detect profound levels of deception. They grasp the true nature of a crime remarkably quickly, even in dire emotionally charged circumstances. Their experience lets them see through immediate facades, recognizing that disconnect between outward appearance or stated emotion and the grim reality of the scene.
Arriving just 20 minutes later was Detective David Harding, head of the Crimes Against Children Unit. His was a job that demanded a unique and truly terrible kind of fortitude, a daily confrontation with humanity's darkest impulses. He's described as a quiet, methodical man, his face permanently etched with a look of weary sadness, bearing the weight of every case he'd encountered. He had a daughter of his own, a bright, bubbly 9-year-old, and you can imagine, with every case like Jailyn's, he felt a piece of his own soul chip away. Harding listened to Easton's grim, raw report, his gaze sweeping over the apartment, confirming every horrifying detail. He saw what Easton had seen, the unsettling evidence of a seemingly happy, normal life, the vacation suitcase, the otherwise tidy living room, abruptly abandoned, and then the stark, horrifying contrast of that back bedroom, a scene of unimaginable suffering.
Candelario's initial interview with Detective Harding was, as the source starkly puts it, a study in practiced deception, almost a carefully choreographed performance. She spun a detailed, albeit entirely fabricated story about a last-minute spontaneous trip to Puerto Rico with a male friend. She insisted, with what she hoped was convincing earnestness, that she had left Jailyn with a babysitter, a friend of a friend, even giving a vague, unhelpful name and description. She wept, she raged, she demanded to know who could have done this to her baby. But Harding, with his years of experience interviewing perpetrators and victims, noted immediate glaring inconsistencies. The details she offered were too vague, the emotions she displayed too broad, almost generic. And there was a chilling detachment in her eyes that just didn't match her supposed grief. She spoke of her daughter's death not as a personal tragedy, a shattering loss that had happened to her, but almost as an inconvenience, a terrible thing that had happened around her. That stark contrast between her stated emotions and her actual demeanor, that kind of flat effect, it's a classic tell for seasoned investigators, right? Signaling a profound lack of genuine empathy.
Yeah, exactly. And here's where Crystal Candelario's carefully constructed narrative began to fall apart, at an astonishing speed, revealing the true, devastating scale of her betrayal. Harding's team, with their relentless dedication, started pulling at the flimsy threads of her story, and the entire fabricated narrative just unraveled with shocking swiftness. First, they quickly discovered the supposed babysitter. Well, she didn't exist at all. She was a figment of Candelario's deception. Then, phone records revealed a truly chilling and damning fact. Cristal Candelario had never called anyone to check on her daughter. Not once. In 10 days. There was no attempt to arrange care, no anxious check-ins, nothing. Just silence. But perhaps the most damning, the most visceral evidence that sealed her fate came from her own digital footprint, her social media posts. While her 3-year-old daughter was literally starving to death, alone in that stifling playpen, Cristal Candelario was, well, gleefully posting smiling selfies from a sun-drenched beach. There were photos of her and her friend laughing, drinking, posing by the ocean, projecting this image of carefree enjoyment. The source highlights a devastating detail that sent shivers down the spines of everyone who saw it. One caption, posted on day 5 of Jailyn's unbearable ordeal, simply read, "With breathtaking indifference, living my best life." Ooh. The stark, grotesque contrast between that carefree declaration and Jailyn's horrifying reality. A little girl agonizingly dying of starvation and dehydration. It's almost too much for the human mind to comprehend, isn't it?
It truly is.
This digital trail of betrayal became an irrefutable avalanche of proof. Each post a silent yet deafening indictment.
And the heartbreaking testimony from Cristal Candelario's own neighbors added another profound layer of tragedy to this case, exposing a painful missed opportunity. When investigators pressed them, they recalled hearing faint, intermittent cries of a child coming from the apartment. They had assumed, quite reasonably, that the mother was home, that the child was simply fussing or maybe throwing a tantrum, normal kid stuff. No one had thought to knock on the door. No one had called the police. For 10 agonizing days, Jailyn's lonely, desperate voice, a primal plea for help, went utterly unheard by the world outside her confines. This tragic irony, it raises a critical insight about community responsibility, doesn't it? This case serves as a stark, painful reminder that what appears to be a private family matter can sometimes mask profound vulnerabilities. It challenges communities to find that delicate balance between respecting privacy and acting decisively on subtle, persistent signs of distress. It underscores the vital, often overlooked role of neighborly vigilance and the responsibility we collectively bear for the welfare of the most vulnerable among us.
Then came the final, brutal chapter in Jailyn's story, a clinical account of unimaginable suffering revealed through the autopsy report. The medical examiner concluded, with chilling precision and absolute certainty, that Jailyn had died of starvation and severe dehydration. The report painted a harrowing picture of a slow, agonizing process, an ordeal that would have been unbearable for a healthy adult, let alone a tiny, helpless 3-year-old child. The medical examiner noted, with its chilling clinical detachment that only served to highlight the horror, that Jailyn had likely been in a state of extreme fear, pain, and distress for the entirety of the 10 days she was left alone. The report explicitly detailed the progression, the initial pangs of hunger and thirst giving way to profound weakness, confusion, and then systemic organ failure. Specific markers were identified, like severe metabolic distress evident in the breakdown of muscle tissue, and clear signs of kidney failure and circulatory collapse, common in severe dehydration. These findings illustrated with brutal clarity just how close to death Jailyn was for days leading up to her passing. It was a truly horrifying medical narrative of her prolonged and agonizing suffering.
And when Detective Harding presented this overwhelming, irrefutable evidence to Cristal Candelario in that stark gray interrogation room, her meticulously maintained performance finally just crumbled. The manufactured tears stopped. The fabricated rage vanished. She sat in silence for a long time, her face a blank mask, as if the immense weight of the truth had finally crushed her carefully constructed facade. And then, in a flat, emotionless voice, devoid of any discernible remorse, she confessed. No babysitter, no last-minute arrangement. She had simply wanted a vacation, a break from the perceived burden of being a mother. So with breathtaking indifference, she had packed her bags, left just 2 bottles of milk in the playpen, a pathetically insufficient provision for 10 days, and walked out the door. She had gone to Puerto Rico for 10 days and had simply left her daughter to die. What's particularly striking here and truly disturbing is the stark absence of any redeeming motive or explanation. There was no talk of postpartum depression, no claims of being overwhelmed to the point of mental break, no plea for understanding based on circumstances. There was only, as the source starkly recounts, a chilling narcissistic selfishness that painted a simple, horrifying portrait of human evil, devoid of any complexity or mitigating factors.
The story of baby Jailyn swiftly transcended its local origins in Cleveland. It wasn't just a local tragedy anymore. It exploded into a national horror story, dominating headlines and social media feeds across the country. The news of the 10 days of neglect, the vacation selfies, the mother's cold, almost casual confession, these details were so monstrous, so antithetical to every instinct of human compassion and parental protection, that they seemed to ignite this firestorm of collective grief and righteous rage across the entire country. Jailyn's face, a beautiful, smiling child with bright, curious eyes, taken from a happy family photo, was suddenly everywhere. She became, in a heartbreaking sense, America's daughter, a universal symbol of ultimate innocence betrayed in profound suffering. The viral hashtag Justice for Jailyn trended for weeks, becoming a rallying cry for millions. Social media platforms were flooded with an outpouring of raw heartbreak and fury. Posts like, "My heart bleeds for baby Jailyn crying helplessly for 10 days," resonated with millions, echoing this widespread sentiment of profound sorrow and empathy. This public grief, this collective anguish became a palpable, undeniable force. Makeshift memorials of stuffed animals, wilting flowers, balloons, handwritten notes grew outside the apartment building. Physical manifestations of the community's profound anguish and despair. The comment sections on news articles were filled with raw, unfiltered fury, a primal scream for a justice that felt almost beyond the scope of any traditional legal system. This wasn't just perceived as a crime, it was perceived as a profound moral sin, a deep wound on the very soul of the community and the nation. The public demanded absolute accountability.
Right. And this immense public pressure undeniably weighed heavily on the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. This is not a case that could afford plea bargains or reduced sentences. The people demanded a full and absolute accounting. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Anna Rodriguez, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer known for her unwavering dedication, understood deeply that she wasn't just trying a murder case. She was channeling the righteous anger and profound sorrow of an entire society. Cristel Candelario's arraignment was, as its source describes, a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with media eager for every detail, with grieving community members seeking closure, and with stoic, grim-faced police officers who had witnessed the horror firsthand. When Candelario was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her face impassive, a palpable wave of revulsion rippled through the gallery. She looked not at the judge, not at her own family weeping in the front row, but directly at the cameras, her expression one of sullen defiance, almost challenging the public's outrage. And then she pleaded not guilty. Those words, spoken in a clear, steady voice, were described by many in the courtroom as a final, egregious insult, a denial of a reality that was so painfully, obviously true to the world.
Cristel Candelario's defense attorney, Mark O'Malley, a weary public defender, faced what the source rightly calls an impossible task to defend the indefensible. He knew intimately that he couldn't argue the facts. The evidence against his client was simply overwhelming, irrefutable. His only possible path was to try and explain the why, to somehow humanize the incomprehensible. So he painstakingly built a defense around a narrative of a young woman cracking under the immense, crushing pressure of single motherhood. He painted a picture of a life of quiet desperation, hinting at severe, undiagnosed postpartum depression, framing her actions not as malice, but as a cry for help that was tragically ignored by a society, he argued, that pays lip service to supporting struggling mothers, but offers little in the way of real, tangible help. He argued that Cristel Candelario hadn't intended to kill her daughter, but had, in her broken, overwhelmed mind, simply needed to escape, even if just for a short time. It was a classic defense strategy, right? A plea for empathy in the face of an utterly unempathetic act. But it felt profoundly hollow and inadequate against the stark, brutal facts and the image of a dying child.
Absolutely. And prosecutor Anna Rodriguez systematically dismantled that defense, not with theatrics or emotional appeals, but with a quiet, relentless, almost surgical precision. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the evidence piece by damning piece, allowing the facts themselves to speak with overwhelming power. She called in the neighbors who testified to hearing Jailyn's faint, heartbreaking cries from the apartment over several days, confirming a pattern of distress. She brought in the friend who had gone on vacation with Candelario, who confirmed Cristel had seemed utterly happy, carefree, had never once mentioned her daughter during their entire trip. No indication of distress or concern. And then, perhaps most chillingly, Rodriguez presented the social media posts, projecting those smiling beach selfies onto a large screen for the jury and the entire courtroom to see.
Wow.
A silent yet deafening monument to narcissistic indifference. This imagery directly countered any claim of a depressive, withdrawn mental state, painting Candelario as fully present, engaged, and seemingly enjoying her best life while her child perished. In her powerful opening statement, Rodriguez's voice was sharp, clear, imbued with unshakable moral clarity. She declared, this was not a cry for help. This was an act of calculated, unconscionable selfishness. This was not a mother overwhelmed beyond her capacity to think. This was a woman who deliberately decided her daughter's life was an inconvenience, a roadblock on her path to a good time, a personal vacation. For 10 days, she continued, she chose the beach over her baby. She chose cocktails over her child's desperate cries. She chose her own fleeting pleasure over her daughter's agonizing pain. It was a devastating indictment, delivered with precision and unyielding moral force, leaving absolutely no room for doubt.
The trial became this grueling, day-by-day account of Jailyn's final lonely ordeal. But perhaps the most powerful and gut-wrenching testimony came from the medical examiner. He described in excruciating clinical detail the biological process of starvation and dehydration as it systematically ravaged Jailyn's tiny body. He laid out the grim stages of suffering the child would have endured, illustrating a horrifying timeline. The initial pangs of hunger and thirst, followed by growing weakness, profound confusion as her body began to shut down. He spoke of the systemic organ failure, kidneys, heart, brain progressively shutting down, and the final agonizing moments of her life as her body literally consumed itself. It was a truly horrifying medical lecture on the brutal, prolonged reality of what Jailyn experienced, painting a picture of relentless pain and terror.
And throughout this harrowing, detailed testimony, Cristel Candelario herself sat at the defense table, her face a mask of utterly detached boredom. She shed no tears, showed no visible remorse. She simply watched, as if observing a story about someone else entirely, a chilling testament to her profound, almost pathological lack of empathy. What's truly striking here is how her complete emotional detachment during such graphic, devastating testimony just reinforced prosecution's narrative of calculated indifference, didn't it?
Completely.
Rather than a mother in distress, her inability to react, to display any human emotion beyond maybe self-pity, effectively undermined any defense based on mental breakdown, solidifying the image of a profoundly selfish individual.
The breaking point for Cristel Candelario came unexpectedly, a pivotal moment in the trial. Faced with the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence against her, the cold, unblinking reality of her monstrous actions laid bare for the world. She made a pivotal decision. She changed her plea, no jury verdict. She pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and child endangerment, effectively throwing herself on the mercy of the court, hoping for a lesser sentence from the judge. This move was highlighted by the source as a final, desperate gambit by her attorney to avoid the death penalty, a last resort to mitigate the inevitable severe punishment.
Exactly. And this change of plea, while undoubtedly a strategic legal maneuver designed to mitigate her sentence, also meant that the full, unvarnished truth would now come directly from her own lips. As she admitted to the horrific facts of the case, her confession echoed the immense, unbearable weight of 10 days of unanswered cries, effectively sealing her public condemnation through her own admission of guilt. What's truly fascinating here is how a strategic legal move, intended to serve her own self-interest by avoiding the ultimate penalty, inadvertently delivered the very public confession that solidified the nation's understanding of her monstrous act, left no room for doubt or further defense. It was a tragic, yet fitting conclusion to the factual portion of the trial.
Sentencing day was, well, it was a somber, profoundly heavy affair. The air in the courtroom, the source tells us, was thick with a grief that felt almost physical, a palpable density of sorrow and outrage. This wasn't just about legal arguments or procedural steps anymore. It was about a profound reckoning, a desperate need for closure, and, most importantly, about giving a voice, finally, to a little girl whose own voice had been tragically, cruelly silenced. The victim impact statements delivered that day were a torrent of raw, unrestrained heartbreak, each word a painful blow to the collective conscience. Jailyn's grandfather, described as a stoic working-class man, spoke with tears streaming down his weathered face. He recounted a bright, happy child who loved to dance and sing, a small burst of joy in their lives, and spoke of his unbearable, crushing guilt for not knowing, for not checking, for simply trusting that a mother would care for her own child. His words to Candelario, delivered with a mix of despair and fury, were searing. She was not an inconvenience, she was a gift, and you threw that gift away in a garbage can of your own selfishness. Even Detective Harding, whose professional composure had held throughout the grueling investigation and trial, finally broke, describing the haunting silence of that apartment that would stay with him forever, a permanent scar on his soul.
Then prosecutor Ana Rodriguez delivered her final, powerful statement, embodying the collective voice of a grieving nation. Standing before the judge, a picture of controlled, righteous fury, she began, her voice resonating with conviction. Her name was Jailyn, and she was not a footnote in her mother's vacation plans. She was a person, a tiny, helpless 3-year-old person who depended entirely on her mother for everything. And that mother, the one person in the world who was supposed to be her protector, her provider, became her executioner. Her voice shook with profound emotion as she vividly described the 10 days of horror, painting a visceral picture of the slow, agonizing death the child had endured. While this defendant was sipping cocktails on a beach, posing for carefree selfies, Rodriguez declared, her voice rising in intensity. Her daughter was dying the loneliest, most terrifying death imaginable. She was alone, in the dark, surrounded by her own filth, crying for a mother who would never come. That is a level of betrayal that is almost impossible to comprehend for any decent human being. It defies all natural instinct. Her words powerfully encapsulated the nation's outrage and sorrow, leaving no doubt about the monstrousness of the crime and the unconscionable nature of the neglect.
Finally, it was Judge Brendan Sheehan's turn to speak, to deliver the definitive judgment. He looked down from the bench, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage, his expression stern and unwavering. Cristel Candelario, for the first time, was visibly weeping, her tears finally clearly for herself and her own fate, not for her child. The judge's words, delivered in a low, thunderous rumble, cut through the silence of the courtroom. "The only difference between you and an animal," he began, his voice laced with searing contempt, "is that an animal would have protected its young. You have committed the ultimate act of betrayal, an unimaginable desecration of the sacred bond between a mother and child." He spoke of this bond not just as a legal concept, but as the very foundation of human compassion and survival, a bond Candelario had not just broken, but had grotesquely, utterly desecrated. His voice rose as he declared, "Just as you did not let Jailyn out of her confinement in that playpen, condemning her to 10 days of isolation and agony, so too should you spend the rest of your life in a cell without freedom. The only difference will be," he added, "that the prison will at least feed you and give you the liquid you so cruelly denied her." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Candelario, his voice now a chilling, deliberate pronouncement. "I am sentencing you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And I want you to know," he finished, "for the rest of your life, I want you to be haunted by the memory of your daughter crying out for you alone for 10 agonizing days."
Wow, that gavel blow, echoing through the stunned courtroom, wasn't just a legal ruling. It was, as the source profoundly puts it, a moral verdict. A final, absolute condemnation of an act of unimaginable cruelty. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it served as both a definitive measure of justice for Jailyn and a profound statement from the community, articulating the depth of societal outrage and the non-negotiable value placed on the lives of its most vulnerable. It was a moment where the legal system gave powerful voice to the collective conscience, a powerful affirmation that such an act would not, could not, go unpunished or unremarked. It was society's emphatic rejection of Cristel Candelario's profound indifference.
The case of baby Jailyn, the source emphasizes, didn't simply end with the sentencing. It left a permanent scar on the city of Cleveland, a raw wound on the hearts of every parent, every compassionate individual who heard the story. It became a kind of modern folktale, a cautionary story of the darkness that can hide behind a smiling selfie, a chilling reminder of the profound and devastating cost of narcissistic selfishness, and the ultimate betrayal of trust. For Detective Harding, the case became a ghost that would walk with him forever, a haunting presence in his daily life. He kept a picture of Jailyn in his desk drawer, a small school photo of her smiling, her bright, curious eyes full of a light that had been so cruelly extinguished. He looked at it often, a stark daily reminder of why he did what he did and of the profound responsibility he carried to protect the innocent. The initial silence in that apartment, the source notes, was the deafening sound of a life unlived, of a future brutally stolen. But now that silence is forever mixed with another sound, the powerful echo of a judge's resolute voice, a prosecutor's impassioned declaration, and a community's collective, unwavering grief. It became the sound of a world that had, in the end, refused to let a little girl's life be forgotten, refusing to let her lonely cries fade into oblivion. Cristel Candelario was sent to the Ohio Reformatory for Women, where she began her life sentence in a small concrete cell. A stark reflection of her daughter's final confinement. She would have a bed 3 meals a day and the rest of her life decades stretching into an endless expanse to contemplate the 10 days she had chosen to erase from her memory, a constant, inescapable reminder of the confinement and deprivation she imposed on her own child.
The story of baby Jailyn lives on, as the source concludes, not just as a tragic memory, but as a testament to the fact that even in a world filled with constant noise and endless distraction, some cries are so pure, so full of pain and innocence that they can break through the silence and demand to be heard. It was indeed the loneliest cry, But in the end, by the sheer force of its tragedy, the entire world had heard it. R.I.P. Jailyn.
This deep dive into The Loneliest Cry serves as a stark, indelible reminder of the ultimate betrayal of trust and the profound, catastrophic cost of narcissistic selfishness. It's a story that challenges us all to look closer, maybe listen more carefully, and to recognize the invisible vulnerabilities that sometimes exist right next door.
Yeah, and that leads us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Beyond the horror and the individual culpability, this case highlights the unseen vulnerabilities that are often present within our communities. It raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? What is our collective responsibility to ensure that no child's cry goes unanswered, even when we make the natural assumption of a parent's protection? How do we, as a society, balance individual autonomy and privacy with the urgent need for community oversight and intervention when the most vulnerable are at profound risk? It's a complex and deeply uncomfortable question, but one that extends far beyond the confines of this single devastating case, and I think demands our ongoing reflection.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly challenging yet critically important deep dive. We hope you continue your own reflection on the insights gained from baby Jailyn's heartbreaking story.